Folks, I hope that you are all having a great day. So, post Roe v. Wade, a lot of people have been asking what's going to be ruled on next. A lot of people had been asking about the LGBT community, and since I'm a part of that community, that's been a big concern of mine too. I'm going to be reading from the Numinous Tarot, which is it is a deck that largely focuses on LGBT experiences, okay? And also, I am using the 7th Sphere, Lenormand, and I'm actually going to use the Lenormand cards first in a full Lenormand spread, all 36 cards, I think, to kind of analyze where exactly the United States is going with its LGBT rights post Roe v. Wade, right? So let's do a Lenormand spread first, and yeah, let's see what kind of answers we get. Okay, folks, with all the cards laid out, I want to look at the heart of the matter first. So, what are we facing in the next couple of years? I'm going to say this is around 5 to 10 years in the future. So I'm hoping that we can make some plans based on this. Please keep in mind that everything is very much subject to change because there are so many things going on. One person doing something can alter consequences down the road. We're in kind of a time period of butterfly effects right now. So we have here a dude facing sexuality. And yeah, I'm getting from Spirit that this is about sexuality and not about being established, retirement. This is the red lily, basically. And there's some kind of communication, some kind of law being handed down, and this is a very destructive male individual. Okay, Spirit is saying that this is more about the patriarchy, about a destructive kind of toxic masculinity, as opposed to a healthy kind of masculinity. This is the toxic masculinity being very homophobic, and there's some anti-feminism that goes alongside being anti-LGBT, right? So it doesn't surprise me that masculine sexuality is really, really, what's the word? It's being severely focused on. But y'all, I do see a destructive law being passed down in 2023. I specifically got that year, and a couple of people have been talking about how the Supreme Court will reconvene next year and they will strike down a law that has to do with sexuality. This could be the sodomy law, for instance, the 2003 Lawrence versus I forgot what, but they might be striking down the sodomy law, and then by extension later marriage laws that allow LGBT couples to get together and stay together. I see some real destruction coming through there. Ultimately, this is about being overly selfish. I hope you guys can see this. This is about being overly selfish, protective of the family, the very traditional stereotype of the Western, the white family, right? So that's been here for a long, long time. And unfortunately, I see a lot of selfishness when it comes to saying, yeah, it's okay for them to love each other, right? Because the LGBT community needs permission from cisgender heterosexual folks. to exist, right? Unfortunately. But I do see there being a lot of difficulties around falling in love, staying together, making a family, and that kind of thing. I'm looking at other influences because here we've got love, child, and then the masculine influence that's really heavily affecting so many of these rulings. So this is a very naive, very childish, not childlike, but childish understanding of love. And that's where a lot of this destruction is coming from here. The patriarchy, the toxic masculinity is pretty much one of the centerpieces of this particular spread. It's a very small-brained understanding of love and affection that's coming from this. This is going to move quickly. These choices are going to happen really, really quickly because they feel like they have the environment now to do this kind of thing. It feels like these folks right here, toxic masculine folks, people who subscribe to the idea that this is okay, this toxic masculinity is okay, are feeling revenged, if you will, over the past 20 years, where they feel like the left has gradually encroached upon their so-called territory. It got especially bad during Obama's era. I miss the hell out of that guy. I wish we could have had him for another 8 years, to be honest. But I don't know that he would have wanted to stick around. I saw gray hairs popping all over his head throughout that tenure. But I miss Obama. These folks really, really don't. And they feel like they're taking back territory. This feels good to them. The small-brained, it feels good to them, for lack of a better explanation. These are incredibly selfish people who are focused on money, focused on what keeps them comfortable and away from situations where they're uncomfortable, right? So that means being away from poor folk. That means being away from different people, aka the LGBT folk. There's a lot of money going into this deeply selfish and ultimately childish enterprise. This is pointless, right? At the end of the day, when we work hard together, progress is inevitable. It might be slow. There might be 2 steps forward when we're taking just 1 step. It's 2 steps back when we're just taking 1 step forward. But at the end of the day, when we work on it, progress is inevitable. So they're basically not doing anything for themselves. Just kicking the can down the road, so to speak. I see a lot of drama. This is a messy kind of luck. So they're taking it's a messy financial risk that they're taking here. It's a messy financial risk that's being made out of a childish, selfish desires. Yeah, because you're taking you're nullifying people's marriages. You're saying that their kids aren't really actually their kids. Yeah, people are going to get really upset very quickly. And Spirit's going to see that money gets wasted. They're going to see that money gets all kinds of drama around it. All kinds of shit on it, so to speak, because they're the birds. Aren't birds clean? They're not. There's also a woman here. This could be toxic femininity. We don't hear that very often, but I absolutely 3,000% believe that it's a factor. It's just kind of a hidden factor. But toxic femininity is part of this too. And it's got us going in a cycle. It's a messy, awful situation. Keeps them in okay, you know what? This keeps the United States in isolation from the rest of the world. You know how lately the world's been looking at us and saying, "Are you okay, United States?" And honestly, we're not. This is part of what's keeping us there is this toxic femininity, this toxic masculinity that feels incredibly comfortable but is ultimately very destructive, not just to LGBT folks, but to cisgender heterosexual folks too. At the end of the day, nothing good comes out of being childish. Do you want to be childlike? That's awesome, right? Face the world with some innocence, looking at the beautiful parts of life, all that kind of good stuff, right? But when you get into childish stuff, you refuse to grow up. That's when planets like Saturn come through and say, I will force you to grow up. Let's look at more diagonals. This is about what's going on into the future, okay? So I see religion being used very violently. It could be that we have some violent Christian terrorist groups come about, not necessarily connected to traditional Christian American terrorist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, for instance, but more newer groups like the Proud Boys, for instance. I see a lot of violence coming through in the name of Christianity, evangelical Christianity. And this is going to be an incredibly heavy, powerful influence going on into the future, because again, people feel like this is the environment now to take back your territory. And unfortunately, this is going to be here for a really long time. The anchor is about a semi-permanent situation, a boat being kept in place until the anchor gets pulled up and it's time to leave. I don't see this anchor being pulled up for very long with this. This is basically the public saying, this is okay. Public is very fickle. Public is very emotional. And at the end of the day, very childish. We see how the public lands next to child and also scythe. The public is going to be forced to come to terms with their attitude, with their deception at some point. They're going to have to come to terms with what they are loyal to their social circumstances, right? So it feels like people just, right here, people continue to do the same thing over and over because doing something new is too scary. Doing the same thing over and over again, looking for the same situations, looking for same in everything is comfortable. And it looks like the United States is going to be kind of jolted out of that later on. Definitely not now. The groundwork, the foundation is being laid now for this reckoning, but it's not going to come through for a while. And I suspect that we're going to have to learn. We're going to have a long-term reckoning. The American public is, with their childishness. They have very successfully, the United States has very successfully isolated itself from others, and we're going to be reaping the consequences for generations to come. Hundreds of years, if we still exist on this planet, right? If global warming hasn't bleached us off the planet by then, they're going to be inheriting the consequences of their karma now for oppressing folks of color, for oppressing the LGBT community. Now they're going to be inheriting that karma now for centuries, dude. The United States might be conquered by other nations as a consequence of how the United States has treated its own people. That might happen to lots of different countries, actually, throughout history. When they treat their people like shit, well, karma comes around to subjugate them, so to speak. There are some people who are ignoring the risk that goes along with this and well into the future. They are going to double down. It looks like the consequences of their beliefs are going to run from generation to generation. Like I was saying, the United States is going to be dealing with its karma for generations, and we're going to start to see that play out in our lifetime. This is a good time for me to let the folks know who need to know that if you can start making your way out of a red state, if you are in a red state, it's time to start making movements, talking to your spirit guides, your ancestors about getting out. If you are in a blue state, this is still going to affect you because these Supreme Court rulings are federally based. So if you're in a red state, maybe get to a blue state until you can get established and then get out of the country for a lot of folks. Definitely not for all. Spirit's going to ask some people to stay behind because they have some work specifically that they need to do here in the United States, and those folks are going to feel that. A lot of other folks are going to feel like, I am trapped, and that's when you need to start consulting with your spirit guides, your ancestors, and possibly a therapist about what you need to do for yourself in order to keep yourself safe. And Spirit really wanted you to know that, okay? If you need to make plans to get out, it's a wise time to start now. Spirit says the writing's on the wall, and she's nodding. Yeah. So I'm looking at this law, this incredibly difficult. This is going to be a difficult law to overturn for whatever reason. It's going to be incredibly dominant. People are going to like it. It's going to make people feel comfortable. It's going to allow them to stuff their own sexualities and gender identities further down. It's going to validate them. It's possible that this could be deceptively dominant in the sense that if some kind of condition comes through, if new people come into power, for instance, this is going to become less powerful. But I also see people lying their way to establishing laws that say it's okay to victimize and oppress LGBT people. It's okay to lie, put them under domination, and pass laws that make it difficult for them to live life. Toxic masculinity is going to pass this law possibly in secret. Kind of like nobody was expecting that memo about Roe v. Wade possibly being overturned a month before it was. No one expected that to come through. There may be some secret messages that let you know, hey, something major is going to happen like it did this year. But otherwise, they're going to really keep the lid tight on that. We saw how upset conservative folks got over that one leak, for the Roe v. Wade memo leak, right? So they're going to make sure that that doesn't happen again. It is possible that this law will be overturned in secret. And ultimately, this toxic masculinity, this is going to be more about politics, especially when it's aligned like this. This is about a public masculine figure, aka a politician, basically being utterly selfish when it comes to these laws. We're talking about toxic masculinity covering up its sexuality. It's money-based. I think that there's something about Hollywood actors being told to not come out if it's not good for their career, and that's part of what's going on here. It is good for your soul to come out. It's not necessarily good in this country for your pocketbook to come out, right? And we can see that in how lots of LGBT folks are at the poverty line or below it. So it's not like money talks here, right? The toxic masculinity says you sexuality because there's money behind it. If there was money behind genuinely loving the LGBT community and all that kind of good stuff, this would be a completely different spread, but that's not what's going on here. It's going to be a continual cycle. So this is I've heard some people call this nation not so much a nation, but a shopping mall where you can just buy anything you want, basically. And I see that kind of playing out in the future. We're going to continually use our money to get us out of emotional situations because that's what we've done. That's what's worked in the past. Why wouldn't it work again? And that's kind of where we get into the definition of insanity. Once again, I don't feel like this is going to be a good place. I don't feel like this country is going to be a good place for a lot of LGBT folks in the future. We're saying 5 to 10 years. If you knew that this was going to last for the next 5 to 10 years, what kinds of plans would you make right now in order to get away from this? Because this is something that the toxic masculine individual and the collective has wanted for a long time. They've wanted dominance over social situations in general, right? Just blanket domination over these kinds of situations. And I do see once again how this is tightly related to religion here. We've got some wishes, hopes, and dreams about dominion. If you ever get into really, really very bizarrely conservative evangelical Christianity, they're all about taking back the nation. Generation Joshua. If you don't know what that is, you need to look it up because it's very important. It's part of their so-called plan, if you will. There are still some Generation Joshua folks out there, and if you do know what I'm talking about, I'm so sorry. You've been through a fire. It all comes down to lies. And now it's interesting. We associate the snake with the devil traditionally, if you want to go from traditional Christianity. And here we have the it's an apple. Well, traditionally it's been like stereotypically an apple. Here it is a pomegranate, kind of letting you know that, hey, a lie creates many, many different seeds that have their own lies that you kind of need to chase down. But the way that they they accomplish what they want is through deception. Ultimately, at the end of the day, these are financial Christians. They're not actual born-again Christian. And I hate to do that whole no true Scotsman thing. But when you see money and deception underlying all their motives, they're not actually religious people. I don't care what faith they are. They're not actually religious people. They're just in it for grifting. It gets them lots of good money. I want to look at this destructive law here. The destruction of Oberfell and Hodges. I believe that was 2015. That's probably going to be on the docket either 23 or 24. If you want to get out before the United States nullifies your marriage, we'd understand. If you're concerned about voting people being left behind, Spirit has some other things to work outside of we need to vote. It is still incredibly important to vote, and I encourage everybody to do it. I will be doing it, okay? On the other hand, there's only so much that voting can do. Voting is incredibly powerful, and these folks know it 100%. They are going to attempt to limit your voting abilities. That's going to be heading up in the future. Also, Spirit is going to work outside of this. So you can do all the voting for blue candidates, LGBT positive candidates, because there are some Republican LGBT folks out there that are LGBT positive. You can do all the voting that you want, but at the end of the day, there's a tide turning, and you're just kind of voting against that massive, massive tide. When in reality, a lot of folks should be getting out of the water and getting up onto the beach and getting as far away from the water as possible, because this rising tide will drown a lot of people. So voting does do stuff to a certain degree, but it's not going to stop this, okay? We're still going to need to get out of our situation because it's going to be kind of catastrophic by this point. We're going to be going through cycles of destruction because by this point we'll have had other laws, really important laws, overturned, and it's just going to make things messier for this. I was talking about people passing away. We've got the coffin here. There might not be any physical actual casualties, but people's hearts and minds and spirits will be destroyed here. I'm seeing a lot of crying people as they're leaving the country, basically. Like, you don't want to leave your home, right? If this country took better care of us when it comes to the laws, or when it comes to how other people, like how communities take care of each other, I don't know. Like this country really kind of hates its people. I don't know how else to put it, dude. I see this really destructive law moving quickly. So next year or two, like I was saying, and it's going to be religion's going to be kicking up clouds of dust all over the place, going to be dramatically confusing the public and us as well. Some LGBT people may deconvert because the religious oppression is just too much. To those folks, hang tight and hang in there, please. Please go to therapy. I'm looking at this top row right here. I see around the toxic femininity card that there's a real risk being taken here, and it's a difficult one. Because this is kind of a turning point for the country, if you will. This is when things start to really get bad for the country, is at this point. When traditionally in the United States, men tend to be more conservative and women tend to be more liberal. Extremely stereotypical, stereotype, okay? Take that with 3 grains of salt at least. But I'm seeing here that quote-unquote liberal women hop on board with the toxic masculinity train and say, you know what? This is correct. Yeah, this is something that we're willing to, this is the hill that we're willing to die on. This is correct. It's going to make things tremendously more difficult because by then it will feel like, well, the war is over. Like, what are we fighting for when it comes to the LGBT community? Okay. So I'm seeing a revolution in education and how laws, this is about law school. So this is going to change how law is taught in a law school. I see all kinds of, like violence is going to create is going to make it so that people try to get away as quick as possible because they can see that this is just going to get worse. But it's interesting, like law schools are going to be transformed because of this. It may be that there's something that limits the Supreme Court's power after a couple of years, but that's still somehow not going to be enough. Eventually, those limiting, Supreme Court limiting laws will come into effect, but when they first are passed, it feels like they're going to continue to do what they want to do until they get like smacked or something like that. I see women starting a lot of this violence. It's like this is an oppressed group that sees other more oppressed people and feels better when they bully these folks. And that's kind of what I'm seeing there, is that toxic femininity is going to do a lot to contribute to the violence of LGBT folks, because that's someone that they can shit all over and feel good about. Spirit says that's no more. Let's move on to tarot. So I want to do a Celtic cross. I'm going to shuffle a little bit more in just a second. But I want to do a Celtic cross on, generally speaking, what can the LGBT community do to handle this as best as possible. I've already done pulled up reversals. So let's do a little bit of shuffling. So, your central card, folks, is to remember that you are empowered by the universe. You have all the tools within yourself that you need to in order to work in your own best interests in spite of the situation. Folks, you are incredibly powerful and you are still loved in spite of the fact that we saw a lot of conservative folks being very comfortable and happy with the oppression of the LGBT community. You are still incredibly powerful. So this is the Knight of Cups. Okay, so we've got two knights here, and that would be about a movement and looking out, exploring for new opportunities. Here it's in reverse, so it may be, folks, that offering your cup of love to your country, the United States, may not be a good thing for you anymore, especially not with the Seven of Swords. And I know it says Seven of Bells. That's the swords version of this. You are going to take back the bells, the swords that were stolen from you, if you offer your cup of love to someone else, such as another country, possibly to a blue state. If you're willing to weather out the storm in a blue state, you should take that as it resonates. But for a lot of folks, that might not be even good enough. So, Explorer of Candles, the Knight of Wands, is about saying, this isn't working for us anymore. Can we explore new ways of doing things? Dude, there are going to be people who celebrate how powerful the LGBT community really is. There are people who are going to be watching for this and celebrating, and this is the Hierophant right here. So, you could say that the Hierophant in this case is spirit. Your ancestors, they are in high approval of you feeling powerful, of you feeling like you have all the tools within yourself that you need in order to be successful, in order to take care of yourself and the people that you love. They are cheering you on. They are applauding you. So this is your advice. Individuals and community, this is your advice. We're going to need to do something new entirely, and this could be a new spiritual venture, partially, okay? But definitely taking new action. Doing some ideation, brainstorming, if you will, into what we can do to get out of our situation to bring our swords back is going to be key to being successful here. And like we were saying earlier, this is going to be a situation that moves very quickly. And again, I'm seeing a lot of people crying because of how fast this has been moving. I want you to hang tight. This is going to move fast, like we saw in the Lenormand reading, I should say. We just saw that. So this is interesting. I see the LGBT community being both afraid and hopeful of new communities. And here we've got a rainbow in the background. So there's all kinds of excitement for new people to meet, new communities to be around, but on the other hand, you folks are going to be forced to leave your home. Red states are going to be very harmful unless you are somehow managed to hide under a rock. They are going to be deeply harmful to you, and even if you hide under a rock, the laws are going to affect you. So both excited about going into a new community and really sad to be leaving behind the community that we have. This is our home, and unfortunately, it's not good for us. And last but not least, that's the Six of Cups in reverse. we are going to have to defeat our sense of nostalgia when it comes to leaving. I personally have been having to kind of say goodbye to a lot of the childhood places that I grew up around and have to come to terms with the fact that I may never see these places again, and that's difficult. That would be difficult for anybody. And yet, it looks like this situation is going to push us into this zone where we say, yeah, I'm nostalgic. I'm going to miss this place, but I can't be here either. It's okay to good cry and sad cry too at the same time, right? Because on the one hand, you would be getting to a safe place, and on the other hand, it's leaving behind a whole lifestyle, leaving behind the restaurants that you were going to, the stores that you shop at, the bars that you frequent. It's I do want to look at the bottom of the deck. We've got the Chariot in reverse. It's the obstacle. This is a tremendous obstacle. We're going to have to find rainbows elsewhere, I guess. Yeah, this is about a violent conflict that is ultimately not for our best interests if it were upright. This might be about us going through a conflict that the universe wants us to go through in order to grow. But no, this is a conflict that's going to say once and for all, no, we don't belong here. So, here we got last card on the bottom of the deck is the Fool, jumping off into a new universe. We don't know what this is going to look like, but since we're doing what the universe asks us to do, we are praying that it's wonderfully blessed, okay? I appreciate you listening to this reading. Please stay safe.